Okay, members of council, if you can please take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. If you can please rise, members of council. Please rise for a moment of silence, and during this time, please remember Kevin Jackson. Thank you. So members of council, we do have a presentation this morning, but before we get to the presentation, I understand that Councillor Pasternak, you wish to make a brief announcement at this time?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our city relies on our post-secondary institutions to become centres of creativity, of leadership, of new inventions, and graduate a new generation of thinkers and doers. Our universities nurture and teach, provide economic activity, and employ thousands of people that have the opportunity to operate as a city within a city. They become centres of recreation, athletics, social and political activism. They welcome people from all over the world and are expected to be institutions of warmth and represent our very best. They do not only have an opportunity to set the civic standard, they can surpass it. Sadly, at York University last week, these expectations were not met. A Jewish group organized an event. It received all its approvals. It was sanctioned by the administration, and it was open to all. Despite this, the event was met by 1,000 protesters. Due to a failed security plan, protesters were able to come face-to-face with those entering the event and those who organized it. The protesters, and I've seen the videos, I've spoken to witnesses, started yelling racial slurs, making threats, shoving participants, and did everything they could do to shut down the event. Toronto police had to be called in to restore order. Our officers from the videos were put in harm's way. As a graduate of York, I am both embarrassed that the rule of the mob has taken over the campus. It is an embarrassment to our city, and the videos are being viewed worldwide. The city that boasts is welcoming to people from all over the world cannot look at this incident and be proud. For York to be a university of high purpose, it must respond. They must stand up to mob rule, hate, racism, and anti-Semitism. I hope you will share with me the request, the demand, that the leadership of York University will take this matter very seriously and the necessary measures so that our students feel they are in a safe and welcoming and pluralistic environment in which they can learn. And that it can happen, and that it cannot happen again. We need them to investigate and act. The right to peaceful assembly is a sacred trust under our Constitution. It should be protected and upheld, but it comes with responsibility and trust. We must continue to make sure that Canada and Toronto remains a place of respect, restraint, and a commitment to peaceful protest. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Councillor Cressy, you would like to make an announcement?
Very briefly, and I'm going to turn it over to our Medical Officer of Health. It is everybody's favorite time of year, flu shot season. And on that basis, Deputy Mayor Stephen Holliday, who was the first this morning to get his, suggested that we do something different here in the chambers. And over to our Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Davila.
Thank you, Councillor Cressy. Just wanted to advise Council that we are making flu vaccine available to you today, and I have with me some members of our fabulous team at Toronto Public Health. Amita Mathur is the manager of our Vaccine Preventable Diseases program, and she brings with her 3 of our supervisors who are here to help make sure that you are protecting yourselves, your families, and our community from the flu. I've got Ann Liddy, Rita Chu, and Addie Summers, supervisors in our Vaccine Preventable Disease program. I would be remiss if I didn't take the moment to remind Council that influenza is a serious illness that affects our community. It's responsible for more than 12,000 hospitalizations every year in this country and roughly about 3,500 deaths every year. So I would encourage you, if you have not already taken the opportunity to get your flu vaccine, we are making it available here for you councillors and for some of our staff here this morning.
So come into the members' lounge, members of council and staff. They'll be there for the next hour. Get your flu shot. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, one at a time. We don't want to lose quorum. Or I'll give you a flu shot. And it won't be for the flu. Members, we have a presentation this morning to recognize the 2019 Toronto Arts Council Leaders Lab Fellows. I would like to call upon Mayor Tory to come forward for the presentation.
I'll put this on. There we go. Well, good morning, colleagues. And before we begin today's meeting, would you join me, and I'd ask them if they would stand, in welcoming our special guests who are the Toronto Arts Council's 2019 Leaders Lab Fellows. So they're right behind us here, and you're all most welcome here. We are pleased to have you with us today, as Toronto just declared 2021 as the Year of Public Art, which is going to further our commitment to the growing arts and culture sector in Toronto, which is one that is extraordinarily important to our social well-being, to our cultural well-being, obviously. And you can please sit. I hadn't meant for you to stand during that. Also, I think, in a way that we don't talk often enough about our social cohesion, our inclusiveness, and our livability as a city. We have, as a council, and I'm proud of this during the time that I've been mayor, we have, as a council, continued to invest more in a sector, the arts and cultural sector, that is flourishing in our city, and our reputation has grown accordingly as a center of creativity, as a place that welcomes creative people, and in particular artists. This has been made possible by the artists, by our partners in the arts community, and by programs that strengthen the arts industry, such as the Leaders Lab program. On that note, I also want to thank the members of council who attended the Mayor's Evening for the Arts last week, which raised more than $1 million to continue to bring free arts to our parks across the city once again in 2020. And that's done under the auspices of the Toronto Arts Council. So 18 of Toronto's leading artists and arts professionals were selected through a highly competitive process to be the Leaders Lab Fellows for 2019. They're now halfway through the program. These fellows have already participated in 2 intensive meetings with our staff from the Economic Development and Culture Division to discuss current challenges and potential solutions for arts and culture in the City of Toronto. The program is now in its 5th year, and it aims to enhance leadership capacity in Toronto's arts and culture sector. So the program does things like build a network of open-minded creative problem solvers and innovative thinkers from out and across the sector so that they can be taking the experience of this program back out into the sector. It strengthens the leadership capacity of the sector. It supports individual leaders as they develop solutions to some of the challenges faced by the sector, and it hopefully invigorates arts leaders to ensure their future capacity, because in the end we can be investors, we can be supporters, which we are, but a lot of what's going to come from the sector itself has to come from the artists and from the arts professionals. So together, I think we are making an impact in the city. I have said many times, and I know this is something that is shared by the members of this council, that the arts not only help us to reveal a part of the soul of the city, help us to tell our stories to each other, help us to create a lot of jobs for a lot of people, but I think hugely important in the most diverse city in the world is that it allows us to keep promoting that kind of common language of visual arts, dance, music, and many other things that allow people to take joy and communicate with each other in a city where they might not be able to speak to each other in the same language. So the purpose of having the group here today, and I'm about to introduce them by name and by their professional affiliation in a moment, is to say thank you to each and every one of you for not just being in this program, but for what you do each and every day before the program and after the program to bring that to reality and make sure that this is something that's binding the community together and enriching us as it's doing, the arts, I mean, in general, and you will be, I hope, better equipped to do that as a result of your participation in this program, and hopefully you'll know each other better, which I think is always one of the benefits of these programs. And so just so you know who these 2019 Leaders Lab Fellows are, and I apologize, I hope I'll get most of the names right here, but I'll do my very best. Jessa Aguilo, founder of multi-art service organization Arts Pond. Shanaz Bakash, Education and Outreach Coordinator, Liaison of Independent Filmmakers of Toronto, LIFT. Noah Bronstein, Senior Curator of Museums, Mississauga, and the Small Arms Inspection Building, which has been part of our Toronto Art Biennial. Sergio Elmir, founder of Futuro Libre Creative Agency. Kathy Gordon, performance maker, curator, producer for Summer Works and the Luminato Festival. Emily Gove, a practicing artist, educator, and director of X-Space Cultural Center. Omer Ismail, who works in community development, arts administration, education, and social enterprise. Mojan Gianfar, an urban and cultural planner and member of the board of the STEPS Initiative. Matt McGeechee, a dramaturge at Factory Theatre. Parul Pandya, a community builder, consultant, and producer specializing in arts for social change. Asad Raza, programs and produces cultural projects and general manager of Necessary Angel Theatre. Luke Reese, a producer for Obsidian Theatre and the artistic director of the Little Black Afro Theatre. Olivia Short, Anishinaabe Irish from Nipissing First Nation, as a Toronto-based saxophonist and multi-instrumentalist, composer, theatre artist, and producer. Atak Sorhitalab, a visual artist and co-founder of ERSA to support new Canadian artists in Toronto. Michael Vickers, an artist and co-director of the local arts organization Akin Collective. Andrea Wilson, Executive Director of Inside Out, the largest presenter of LGBTQ film in Toronto. Amy Wong, the founder of Angry Asian Feminist Gang, and Deanna Wong, the Executive Director of the Toronto Real Asian International Film Festival. So with apologies for anything I didn't do well on the names, you're most welcome here. Congratulations on being in the program. Thank you for being in the program, and thank you for what you do.
Members of Council, we will now review and confirm the order paper. There are 34 items left on the agenda, including 29 member motions. Yesterday, Council decided to consider the following items as the first and second item of business today. Item PH 10.4, amendments on Chapter 354, apartment buildings and progress update on rent safe, and item EX 10.6, on development charges complaint for 1251 Bridal Town Circle, and City Council will consider member motions at 2 p.m. I will now take the release of member holds, if there are any. Okay, all those in favor of adopting the order paper? Carried. So, page 3, PH 10.4, amendments to Chapter 354, apartment buildings. Councillor Matlow, you held the item down. Do we have questions to staff? Deputy Mayor Minawong.
This is 10.4, yes?
Yes.
Okay. There's a recommendation in the report to put a significant burden on owners of rental buildings when there's a fire or something like this, and the tenants have to be moved to another location. Is that based on the principle that it seems that that burden is linked to that somehow being the landlord's fault? Is that a proper analysis?
Thank you for the question.
I've got a few more too. So.
Okay, so first of all, we believe that landlords have a responsibility for taking care of their tenants in the event of evacuation. We also are aware that the city has a role through our emergency services response, that we have a role as well.
Just one, hold on. There's far too much noise in here, please. Okay, thank you.
And then the last piece I just want to add to the introductory response is that it's only to be used in extreme cases.
So, in the case of arson, this would be an arrangement where it is clearly not it is not the landlord's fault. And let's say an unfortunate occurrence happens. Should a landlord be financially responsible for an incident that is beyond their control or responsibility when they run and have, let's say, a safe building where there's no reason that there should be a fire of such a nature?
Recognizing this is a question related to fire, I think it's more appropriate for Deputy Chief and Acting Chief Jessup to respond.
So through the chair, in terms of the responsibility, I can't speak, Councillor, to the legal responsibility of landlords and the responsibility of tenants. Certainly, the number of significant issues we have seen this year, most recently is Gosford, the cause of which is still under investigation. We've had fires that have been because of system failures, and we've had fires because of accidental issues, and we've had fires in buildings because they've been intentionally set. But Toronto Fire can't comment on what we believe the landlord's legal responsibilities are to the tenants. All we can speak to is how the fires are caused and the state of the building at that time.
Okay,
but I don't have a position on a landlord's legal responsibilities.
So, Madam Chair, the Executive Director referred the answer over to the Fire Department, who doesn't have an answer. So, I'd like an answer with regards...
Hold on. We've got the solicitor to respond.
Yeah.
Madam Speaker, while I'm not comfortable commenting on any specific scenario...
I'm not asking for specific...
and I do appreciate that. While a tenancy agreement remains in force, a landlord is responsible for housing the tenants. So in this instance, the city would be stepping in to provide a service to the landlord and charging for that service.
Sorry, you said the landlord has a responsibility to house the tenants. Yes?
Yes.
So
Well, a
let's
tenancy agreement
let's
remains
work
in force.
let's work through that a little bit. So let's say something very unfortunate happens that is unreasonable to assume that it's the responsibility of the owner of the building. He keeps a very nice building, yet something unfortunate happens. Let's say someone sets, the only example that I can come to is, or someone breaks a water main, sets, there's a fire or something like this. It's not their fault. Someone has purposely done something reckless. In this arrangement, the landlord would be responsible for does the landlord have a responsibility to house those people if they have to leave the building?
So, Madam Speaker, I'm not prepared to comment on those specific potential scenarios. What I can say is, provided that the lease remains in force, the landlord does have a responsibility. The question included a number of fact scenarios which would have to be analyzed in each instance.
So you're saying that the landlord in a lease arrangement at common law, the common law would have a responsibility, or is it put in a lease as a term of the lease? And if it's either in common law or within the term of the lease, why are we legislating it through a bylaw?
What we're including in the bylaw is a fee, Madam Speaker. So the city would be stepping in to provide a service to the landlord and charging the landlord for that service.
I see. And the service, it's the service of housing them.
Yes.
Even though it's not their fault, they get charged a fee.
That was your last question. Thank you. Councillor Pasternak.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to pick up where the Deputy Mayor left off on this whole idea of the recovery of cost concept in the situation of a fire or other incident in a building. If such were to occur in a TCH building, what would be the obligation of the city to tenants? Would we? I mean, obviously, there's the ethical piece. We would want a roof over their heads. But what is there synergies with the rules we're looking at here?
So there are synergies with respect to the responsibility to find housing for the tenants. The difference in this case would be we would not charge them the variable fee, and that's also because we do not charge them the registration fee for the apartment for the rental program.
Now, you cannot operate a multi-unit residential rental building in this city without insurance. Would that be a correct statement? What do you mean by it'd be highly unlikely you get any financing or any kind of support without insurance. Is that a fair statement?
It's not a requirement, but it is, again, as a fair statement that for financing, you would imagine you would need to have proof of insurance.
Well, the
Proof of insurance relates to general liability or business interruption. It may not lead to insurance that covers rehousing people.
Okay, so now you're delving into the weeds with the policy itself. Did committee look at the possibility of requiring the owners of multi-unit residential to carry a large insurance policy? I don't know why I wrote $5 million in my notes that would cover housing in such a catastrophic event, rather than this kind of convoluted recovery of costs, collecting a fee kind of approach.
So the collecting of a fee is only in rare instances. Requiring a landlord or a tenant to carry insurance has a financial burden that maybe, in the landlord's case, could be passed on to tenants. Businesses have a choice on how they operate their buildings. But again, the two pieces of insurance, and we spoke with the Insurance Bureau of Canada on this as a result of the St. Jamestown incidents. We did our due diligence, and they did not recommend it. There isn't a product that necessarily deals with this.
Well, certainly you cannot drive an automobile in this province without insurance. You probably would never get a mortgage for a residence, a private residence, without insurance. You have to prove you have insurance to get the financing. Why couldn't those same conditions apply to these towers, and that we require them? I mean, we require it from all our vendors on procurement, that they carry a certain amount of liability in case of mishap or injury or death on the work site.
So your examples are correct with related to the Ministry of Transportation. This is a business decision on what type of insurance and to what level of insurance versus a bylaw prescribing the type and amount of insurance you would have.
So another aspect of what's before us is when the term substantial portion of the building becomes uninhabitable. Is that, do you take the number of units, and if it's over 50%, that's substantial, or does it have to reach 70%, or what's the benchmark here?
Fair question. I don't think it has an exact benchmark. Substantial is, again, a significant. It's not 1 or 2 units, it's many.
Tenants, do any of these leases require tenants to have some kind of contents insurance or substitute housing insurance for their tenancy, or that requirement is rare?
The tenant lease is a provincial document. It is set. What it prescribes about contents or tenants is, I'm not exactly sure, but it's the tenant's decision to get contents or tenants. Often tenants just get contents to protect in the event of their items are stolen, versus tenant insurance, which is similar to car. If you get in an accident, you get a replacement vehicle. If you would have an incident, it could cover the cost of rehousing in a hotel.
Now, what if the fire marshal's office is called in and it's considered arson? Would the building owner still be liable under these provisions?
Yes. The short answer is yes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Speaker. I wanted to ask about the building audits that's done. I understand there's roughly 3,000 of them done. There's about 15, I believe, to 20 that fail below the 50 mark. I'm just trying to understand. One of those buildings in my ward, we had a lot of outreach from residents about it. My staff were trying to find out the dynamics of that scenario, and we're having a hard time getting information. Would it be possible, if a building fails that audit, that the local councillor can be notified?
What's in our program, what we plan to do is put everything on open data, and if you are to ask, first of all, we're going to post it, the grade in a obvious place in the building, and if it said 48%, then each tenant could ask for a why, what are the main reasons behind it. So that is something that will be available.
Okay, but you'll notify the councillor as well?
We can, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ford?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So I think I want to go down the same kind of train of thought as my colleague. So your recommendations on 2A, I assume as you developed this policy, you would have had to look at past instances where the city has taken a high burden of cost on some sort of evacuation of the building, housing costs, whatever they may be. What examples could staff give of past issues that this would have applied to, this policy?
To the councillor, I think the most recent examples are 650 Parliament and 260 Wellesley. They are both incidents where the city had to step in, had to use city facilities to provide housing. So there's lost revenue there on programming. We also had to step in and work with hotels and the Red Cross to get hotels. So those are two really good examples that have brought this to the forefront in the discussion. It is why the cost recovery tool is here today. This item has been before council twice already this year, and the cost recovery tool was something that was asked for, and that's why we brought it here. We've done a lot of work in determining how to do it, and that's how we've come with this recommendation based on a lot of work with legal and others.
Mm-hmm. In those examples, I don't know if this is a public question, could be an in-camera question, but I don't want to go in there. But what costs have the city kind of taken on in those circumstances? What has been the cost burden to the city?
Good question. I don't have that level of detail, but there's costs for our Office of Emergency Management to step in, again, parks facilities, to use our facilities, other staff that we have in the housing areas to look for housing and find it. So there's a significant amount of work that goes into this. I know Councillor Wong Tam played a big role in those, so there's a lot that goes into it.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any idea? I'm just reading through the report, and I may have missed it, so my apologies if I have. But do we have a specific fee structure that will apply in certain circumstances? I know it's very depending on the circumstances, but do we have a ballpark idea of what these costs could be?
So there isn't a set fee. It is a variable fee, but what I can tell you is we would utilize the guidelines that are established by the Red Cross. And for example, for housing, for lodging in a hotel, it's $170 per night. Obviously in Toronto, that's a little more expensive. Based on information we have from the Greater Toronto Hotel Association, it's closer to $200 per night. So that's an example of the fees that we would use and we would charge back to recover those costs. Again, only in the event that the landlord didn't take the best efforts to find housing for their tenants.
Right. So my last question, and this is kind of, directly continuing off my colleagues' questions. So when there is fire in the building, the whole list of circumstances that can happen to evacuate a building, whether it is the negligence of the property owner or not, we are expecting this policy to apply. So even if it is not the property owner's fault, we would still implement this policy.
So based on the lease agreement with the tenant and the landlord, it's the landlord's responsibility to take care of their tenants and find them housing.
In all circumstances?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Just to follow my colleague's line of question, I just want to seek further clarification. Is there anything contained in this bylaw amendment, this attempt to improve the bylaw, that is improperly or illegally before us today? Do we have the right to do this?
Yes, we do.
And with respect to the cost recovery for services rendered on behalf of the city in the absence of services offered by the landlord. In emergency procedures, are you trying to create a profit center? Do you add on any additional charges that we would not have to sort of pad the price? Are you making a profit in this, or is it just strictly cost recovery?
Great question. This is truly cost recovery, nothing more, nothing less. We want to ensure that the cost that the city incurs related to lodging, food, etc., is covered. This is not a revenue generator for the city.
And with respect to the responsibilities of continuous housing by the landlord by way of contract with the tenant, and perhaps this is a question for the city solicitor, is there any example, any incident, any situation that would release the landlord from their obligation of providing continuous housing to a tenant while they're under active contract?
Madam Speaker, it's very difficult to comment on a hypothetical, but the concept is that should the lease remain in force, the landlord remains obliged.
Right. And it matters not whether it's a one-year lease with options to renew or if it's a month-to-month rental lease term. As long as they have an obligation to house.
If there's an obligation under the lease, there's an obligation under the lease. Should the lease remain in force?
And most lease templates, they have some general language that says that the tenant should have the right to quiet, uninterrupted, safe access to housing, something to that extent. Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a quiet enjoyment clause.
Yes, it's a boiler template in every single standard lease agreement.
That's correct.
And with respect to the cost recovery efforts of 650 Parliament, which is one of the biggest evacuations that we've seen in the city. Am I accurate to say, is this correct to say that the city has expended into the quantums of millions of dollars to provide supports for this landlord while these 1,500 residents have been displaced and sort of scattered across the city? It's been over a year.
Madam Speaker, I'm going to suggest that that question is better answered by others. I don't have the number.
Okay, thank you. And if you don't have an exact number, am I correct to say that we're into the millions that the city has spent on behalf of the landlord?
Yes, that is correct.
And how do we recover the millions of dollars that we have spent on behalf of this landlord to provide supports and housing to the tenants?
So that matter is currently before the courts.
So we have to take them to court to recover that cost.
In this case, yes, and that's why we're introducing a cost recovery tool that we could use in the event that a landlord isn't a good landlord. I just want to reiterate that most landlords will not have to do this. It's the ones that don't take care and where this does happen, which we would execute the cost recovery tool.
And would you say that most landlords, whether they're good or not, and incidents do happen, we recognize that, they should have enough insurance coverage and if the product is out there, they should buy it, that they should have enough insurance coverage to provide extended stays and accommodation for their tenants should they be displaced?
It's a business decision for the landlords, but landlords need to identify, they need to be aware of the business they're in, be aware of what is happening in today's world, and that these incidents are becoming more frequent, and to have the appropriate insurance.
So it's a landlord choice. It's a consumer product choice. So they could choose to have a package, an insurance package that's very comprehensive and wide-ranging, or they could choose the bargain bin basement insurance package that gives us as little coverage as possible, but they meet their financial obligations to their lenders.
That's correct.
And then finally, with respect to the city's vital service disruption policy that we have just created in the earlier months, that's largely to ensure that the landlords are compelled to have an emergency strategy in case there's displacement. So if they have a vital service disruption plan, it should also give them enough coverage that when a building does go dark or they're not able to inhabit safely, it actually allows them to think proactively on what to do when an emergency happens. Thank you.
That was your last question.
Yeah, again, the two reports that we heard earlier this year introduced requirements for a vital services and an electoral safety plan. Again, both plans that lead to minimizing this in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff. When we have different rules and regulations that apply to rental buildings, houses, building codes and everything else, we ask that the landlord enforce those bylaws that we have. Like, I mean, would it be like a railing, different structures in a house and all that stuff? We ask for that to be enforced, correct?
So there are two bylaws before us that related to apartment buildings. There's the rent safety or the apartment building bylaw, and then there's another bylaw, the property standards bylaw, which is for both homes and apartment buildings, which deals with railings and those matters of property standards.
So those bylaws, we go in and enforce.
Yes.
And if they don't comply, then we bring the book down on them. Correct?
We would give them an order to comply, and we would give a timeline on when that work should be done. Railings is a good example because there's steel fabrication and it may take longer. It's not a quick fix.
Other businesses that carry on business, like a restaurant, a cab, we have rules and regulations that apply to them, especially cabs. We have to say to them that they have to get insurance in order to protect their customers. Would I be correct in that?
Yeah, that's correct. It's a city requirement, but it's also a requirement from the Ministry of Transportation.
What is there to stop us that we say to the building owner of rental buildings that you need to have insurance, that if people are misplaced because of an accident, because of your negligence or somebody else's negligence, that insurance kicks in and looks after the tenants?
So it seems like a simple fix. It is not. The Insurance Bureau of Canada shared with us that product does not exist. There is business interruption insurance and there's general liability insurance. There isn't an insurance that necessarily covers rehousing. It's not that specific.
There isn't an insurance that necessarily, quote unquote, covers that. But that product could be available upon the request of the landlord. I mean, they insure everything. They insure, insurances come up and insure concerts if there's rain. I mean, if they insure concerts if there's rain, for, really thinking that they could insure a building in order to have the tenants moved out.
That is correct, but it doesn't exist currently. The product, as again, you use the taxi Uber example, the product didn't exist until it was developed. The insurance companies haven't landed on a product that's been approved by Insurance Bureau of Canada to do this.
The City of Toronto be the largest municipality of rental buildings? Would I be correct?
I would believe so.
Okay. Couldn't we then take a look at this? Couldn't your unit take a look at this, work with insurance companies and make suggestions for us moving forward, so should there an accident occur, that the insurance company kicks in?
So I believe there's a motion coming to that effect later from Councillor Peruzza to look into insurance related to from a tenant and a landlord perspective.
Okay, I thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Holiday, questions.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to municipal licensing and standards, I guess. The dialogue of the report on page 15, and I'll read it quickly. Where there's an evacuation resulting from extreme weather event or other events that could reasonably be considered beyond the control of the landlord may be exempted from the city providing the associated services on their behalf. I listened earlier to some of the questions from Councillor Min Wong and others, Deputy Mayor Min Wong, just about those circumstances where nothing that the landlord could have done to prevent the situation occurred. And things that come to mind would be a deliberately set fire, someone who had maliciously flooded an apartment, or maybe criminal activity where they set up a drug lab, or maybe that became a crime scene. Would you exempt the landlord in those circumstances? Or does this bylaw continue to apply?
Through the chair, I would not. No. The short answer is no. As for reasons given earlier, that it is the responsibility of the landlord to take care of their tenants. The difference in this piece would be a natural disaster where there may be an exemption versus the activities that you used in your examples.
So what sets a natural disaster apart from the other scenarios? Does that respond back to the lease? Is that like talking force majeure? That puts the landlord in a situation where they couldn't meet the obligations of their lease? Is that where we're going with this, or?
It would be an extreme case, and in the example of a natural disaster, it would affect multiple landlords. The examples you're using are just one particular building, one landlord. Again, an extreme measure would be 3,500 buildings impacted.
So is the intent of the rule then to backstop landlords that do not comply with their lease? And I guess the idea would be is all the tenants would have to sue them one by one for not looking after them. So in essence, the city is going to look after them and charge the landlord back as a cost recovery, but that in itself is a bit of a backstop. Is that where we're going with this?
We're going with a backstop for landlords that don't take the necessary precautions to take care of their tenants.
And could you just firm up for me, because I don't know much about the leases and the standard language of it, but is that the information that you've got, is that every lease or common law says that the landlord has to look after the tenants and accommodate them in the scenarios where their units are no longer available?
Yes, that's through the Residential Tenancies Act. That's the provincial act.
So today, the remedy for a landlord that doesn't comply with the act would be provincial offense charges and so on, or a court action to go and recover the money. Do I understand that? So this is doing away with those processes and having something a little bit more direct.
That's correct. We want to have the tool to step in when a landlord hasn't taken the necessary actions to rehouse their staff, their tenants.
On the side of fire services, would you say that they do something similar when there are persistent alarms in a building? The fire department charges back the landlord because it's a cost to roll the trucks, and perhaps there may be situations where the landlord can mitigate it, but sometimes there's not, and these are significant costs. Would I be correct in that?
So through the chair, the bylaw that deals with malicious or nuisance false alarms, Councillor, the fire chief has very limited discretion in what we are allowed to waive, and that is only when the landlord demonstrates that they've made a significant investment in mitigating those alarms. So, for example, malicious alarms where we have people pull the alarms in buildings, whether or not the landlord is responsible or knows the person or does it himself, they still get the bill every time Toronto Fire shows up.
Thank you. And so just to cap that off, that it's a fairly similar concept that we're bringing, and I guess back over to Carlton. Could you give council some comfort that if there's a dispute with the landlord in saying, you know, I shouldn't be responsible for these costs for whatever reason, what's the mechanism for them to go and try to get a remedy on that? The courts, is it to you, is it to council?
I would imagine through the courts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Tory.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. I'd like to just go back to, I think, an area of questioning that has been taken up by a number of the members of council, and just because I'm still not exactly clear on the answer. The first question, which probably goes to the solicitor, is do we as a city council, do we have the legal right to require landlords to have insurance, including specific aspects of insurance, riders and so on, that would cover homelessness? I mean, my questions are informed by a visit to York University last night, where again we have people who are displaced and we have to assert responsibility. But do we have the right to require that insurance as part of this or some other legal mechanism?
Madam Speaker, we would have to look into that. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. So there wasn't any looking into it then that led to this mechanism, which is slightly different, which is a sort of cost recovery fee. That's the best way I could describe it. There wasn't any looking into the precise question of whether we had the legal authority to require insurance of landlords.
I believe there was, and I believe it was determined that the product did not exist. Okay. So we didn't go further than that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I don't know who this question would go to, but I guess, would I be right in saying that there's only 3 possible people who could pay in an event of a disaster, fire, some other thing? Only 3 possible people who could pay. One, it would be the tenants, which seems manifestly unfair, and in most cases, whether it's unfair or fair, they couldn't pay. 'Cause certainly the group last night and the group on Parliament Street have no ability to pay, and it seems unfair anyway. Secondly, would be the government, whether it's this government or some other government, and that doesn't seem fair either. And third would be the landlord and/or their insurer. Is there anybody else we could think of who could pay the cost of the of replacement or temporary housing for people who are displaced by a major fire?
No, I think that's a good summation that those are the 3 main players in this.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford?
Thanks very much. I think these questions will be for MLS, just a few, and I wanted to bring up the issue of heat in the units. This is something that tenant groups in my area have been very concerned about, and I can see from the decision history that it's something that council has been concerned about for a number of years. Could you tell me the status of the heat in apartments working group?
So there's a few working groups on this. We partner with Public Health on this. I may be getting it confused, but there's another group that Josie Scioli leads on cooling. So there's a number of groups that we are well aware of this matter between the heat and cooling, and we are a participant.
Right, and yeah, just to clarify, I'm interested in the heat aspect during the summer, so effectively cooling. So we have a cooling working group?
That may not be the correct name, but you're close.
Okay. And there was supposed to be a report coming back from MLS and Public Health in September outlining measures to help reduce extreme heat, among other items. Did that happen? And I'm wondering what the outcomes or the findings of that report were.
So I believe that report was actually here yesterday from the Board of Health. We have reported with them on a number of matters related to heat. We talk about shoulder seasons. We talk about educating landlords on how to deal with those shoulder seasons. So that is an active piece of work.
What are some of the strategies that we're bringing forward to address the maximum heat temperature in the summertime issue in some of these buildings? Maybe that's for Public Health.
So it's a piece we're still working on. It's a part of that working group. We're looking at a number of areas. But you're right, a number of the buildings in the city of Toronto were built before air conditioning.
Right.
And so it is a major issue. It is a challenging issue that we are trying to work through as a collective group, as a city.
Okay. And from a regulatory perspective, just for my clarity, what is our ability as a city or MLS bylaw to actually implement a maximum unit temperature regulation? Is that possible? Is that something that we can do?
So it's a challenge. I believe in our bylaw there is a range of temperature and a range of date. So it is something that we try to obviously minimize. We respond to heat calls. I would also state that there are we only get typically 30 calls per year on this.
Okay. Although I recognize, there's a lot to call in and complain about it versus just sit there, sweat, and suffer. Is our approach more in line with perhaps moving forward with cooling rooms or places of respite where you can cool off versus a maximum heat temperature in the summer?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Are there any further questions on the item? Okay, Councillor Matlow to speak.
Madam Speaker, first of all, I have a, I think it's fair to call it a technical amendment. I was just informed by staff that I just needed to reword the way that one of the committee recommendations was set forward, and that's what that motion does. So, first of all, when in 2017, when I was the chair of the Tenant Issues Committee, and I worked with my colleagues on implementing the Rent Safe initiative with city staff, we boasted that was I think a historic and iconic and perhaps the strongest tenant protection legislation by a municipality in North America. And at that time, we believed that was true. And I still believe that it's true as far as what the framework is. But I think it's really important that when we are proud of the work we do, we don't get so blinded by that excitement and pride and not be able to admit where there are shortcomings and failures. And I think that the idea and the concept and the principles and the framework are strong, but this has not moved as strongly as we would have liked to hope. And I think that there is significant room for improvement if we are to be true to ourselves and true to organizations like ACORN and FMTA and the tenants throughout our city who are expecting that we do everything we can within the limited toolbox we have to be able to protect their health and their safety. So within the new items that you'll see in the recommendations, we're asking for our MSOs to be able to enforce the RTA when there are infractions. We commonly see the city enforce things like the building code and through the police, the Highway Traffic Act, and other that are provincial legislations. But typically when there are rent evictions or when landlords exploit their own use exemption, when they're allowed to say, well, my sister or my brother or my parent is going to move in, but then really what it is that they're just trying to get the tenant out so that they can hike the rent on a vacant unit. There is no ability for us to ensure that there's an investigation while that's happening, rather than the tenant having to go to the landlord-tenant board after the fact, when their life has already been turned upside down and more expensive, and that's unacceptable. We are also asking for staff to finally move forward with the rating system. The reason, by the way, we called this Rent Safe is that we were reflecting a very successful program called Dine Safe. That was the whole idea. That's why you'll see those little keychains they call Rent Safe now. That was the idea. And the whole idea is that a prospective tenant should be able to know what they're walking into before they sign on the dotted line. Far too often tenants will get a lease and move in, and then they realize that they're in a horrible and shameful situation. I've heard some arguments suggest that this rating system might stigmatize the tenants themselves. But if you look at ACORN, if you look at tenants across our city, they're saying quite the opposite. They're already stigmatized by the shameful state that their building is in. They are feeling ashamed to invite their parents over, their friends over, their families. They don't need anything else to tell them that they are stigmatized or feel shame. They're asking us to call out the landlord. And the vast preponderance of landlords will see a green sticker or sign in their window for many years. That's what we want to see happen in the city. But for the few who are the bad apples, of course they should be called out. They're the ones who should be shamed, and tenants should be able to know before they sign on the dotted line that that's the kind of building that landlord keeps it in. That landlord looks at it as simply a business rather than having some power over people's homes. We also want to see, and this was this kind of clarification motion, that far too often the Property Standards Committee provides extensions to landlords when they have outstanding work orders. This can go on for months, if not years. And the tenant is just stuck in the state of limbo, where their unit's not repaired, their building's not repaired. And that has to be limited. Those should be really extreme situations, not just a regular series of events. Staff have an opportunity to act on Council's resolutions. Council has an opportunity to demonstrate the leadership that I know that we have the ability to do, and tenants have the ability, through us, to have more protection for their health and their safety, and ultimately, the quality of life in their homes.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Matlow. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have a motion. If the staff can put it up, I'll appreciate it. Can you hold my time, please, Madam
Yeah.
Speaker? Can you start the clock over, Madam Speaker? Thank you. Madam Speaker, there is a motion that I have that we're asking the Executive Director to look at products and work with insurance companies and come back to the Licensing and Standards Committee in order for us to take a look at ensuring that there's insurance that landlords of rental buildings have that look after their tenants. We look in the news over the years on Parliament, out in the West End, in my colleague Perucha's area, that there's fires and things that happen in buildings that are older buildings, 30 or 40 years old, and they didn't have an opportunity to have sprinkler systems in them. In my ward 22, I have something like about 75 or 80 apartment buildings, and a lot of them are rental buildings. And I've time and time again have spoken to Deputy Chief Jim Jessup about the possibility, could we have something like what happened in London, England, happen in Canada, and I was assured that that couldn't happen. But unfortunately, we did have an instance just last couple of days where people out in Etobicoke had to go out of their houses because of a fire that has started. There's buildings that if we look to retrofit and put in them sprinkler systems, it will cost the landlords a great amount of money, and a lot of them will just get out of the business. However, there's nothing that stops us from making sure that there's insurance in those buildings in order for, should an accident happen, not only to cover the recovery of bringing the building back up to code, but also making sure that the people that were misplaced are be looked after in housing and their belongings to be looked after in housing. I wouldn't say their belongings. Now, there is insurance that we ask a lot of people to have in their buildings, insurance that we have to people in when they drive a taxi cab. There should be an insurance product out there that asks the landlord to make sure that he or she has insurance on the buildings that looks after the tenants that are misplaced. It's nice to rent, to have a building and rent and make money and then go to the bank and make your deposits and say at the end of the day to your shareholders, this is the bottom line and this is how much money we made. But it also is appropriate for the landlords to make sure that they have insurance that covers their misplaced tenants. Time and time again, the city has to step in and say, let's see how we can help. And we see a lot of us, councillors and the mayor, running to these events, and we bring our buses and say, we're going to place people here tonight, and we look to make arrangements either to put them in schools or community centers. However, this should be the responsibility, strictly the responsibility of the landlord. The landlord is running a business. She or he's running a business. They're there to make money. They should also be responsible to make sure that the money that they earn from the people that they house also goes to address the issue of them being able to be placed and to be looked after in a situation should a fire or anything else or an electrical event or an emergency event happens. Madam Speaker, I bring this to the attention and I hope that my colleagues would support it.
Thank you. We do have some questions for you. 3 minutes, clarification of the motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and through you. With respect to the insurance products that are out there, would it not be just incumbent on the landlord? Usually these are corporations that are run by staff and with professional advice, that they would just know what is out there? Isn't it that just their obligation?
I thank you for the question. However, in listening to the Executive Director of Municipal Licensing and Standards, we were advised that there's no such product out there. A lot of the landlords are hesitant to go in this fashion. So I'd like to get a report back that says what's out there in order for us to make sure that we do have coverage for our tenants. There's insurance coverage for all kinds of events. There's insurance coverage, believe it or not, if you're going to have like an event at a park and there's rain, that it covers you. So why should there be an insurance, or why should we not move, or why can we not entice insurance to have this product and then ask or enforce that the landlords buy into it?
So would it not be just incumbent on the marketplace? We talk about the marketplace meeting the needs of the demand. That if the insurance companies can create a product, and actually I'm going to assume that the product is out there, to be quite honest, because I don't believe that it's not, and I don't believe that's what staff said, that the product's not available. So if when the product is available, but you have a menu of options, and the landlord just chooses not to purchase the Cadillac coverage of policies, but they choose the bargain basement bin policy, like why would we get involved with that discussion?
We get involved with the discussion about safety of our residents. We get involved with the discussion of railings. We get involved with the discussion of sprinklers and new buildings and everything else. I think it behooves us to get the responsible here. If the landlord does not want to move in that fashion, then in order for him or her to be licensed to rent those buildings out, we should make sure that they are in that position, that they provide this option to our citizens. We cannot, every time that something happens, be responding time and time again and hold the city responsible. I think it's the responsibility of the landlord, he or she is making money, to provide that coverage. And that should not be an option, that must be a must.
So
and
are
not
we,
passed on to the tenants.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Councillor. I just want to make sure that we're not setting up a scenario here where we have the industry of that lobby on behalf of apartment owners and the industry around the insurance companies saying, the product doesn't exist, you're asking for something that... I just want to make sure we're not setting up a conversation that's going to benefit the landlord in removing themselves from that obligation and responsibility so that they can actually avoid the bylaw.
You know,
and that's not your intention, is that correct?
Councillor, I want to thank you for the question. I see some people in shirts in the back Acorn, and I got to tell you, having spoken to them, having worked with them, as well as myself and others in this chamber, I would say to you that they would welcome an addition that tenants are covered and have an insurance that looks after them being misplaced in a case of an emergency.
Thank you. To speak, Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I see where the discussion is going. I listened carefully to the questions of staff. I've read through the report here, and I think this has to go back to committee. I'm going to refer this back to the Planning and Housing Committee for further consideration. When I look at item 2 in particular, I see this as a rent hike. I see this cost that we're imposing, and tenants should be protected. They should have secure housing in an emergency. But we have to make sure the tenants are protected, and I see this as a rent hike. At the same time, we are encouraging across our city for developers to build purpose-built rental. And this represents another barrier, another economic barrier for us to increase our rental stock. We need to look at the insurance options, as Councillor Karagianis and some of the questioners clearly worked out. You can insure almost anything. You can insure racehorses, you can insure paintings, you can insure your pets. I can't believe there isn't a product out there. It comes at a big cost that can insure an apartment building based on the requirements here of more than 3 stories, 10 or more units, and so forth. I find this will lead us to years of litigation. I think this will be hurtful to tenants. It will not help tenants. And I think more work has to be done at the committee level. On the positive side, I thank committee members for their work on the file. I think this is the direction we have to go. I think we have to focus more on an emergency management plan than trying to make building owners pay in times of calamity. In other words, on the preventative side, on the inspection side, on the fire services side, on inspection of boilers, on inspection of roofs. And of course, we have a program at the city that deals with things like hoarding. And it's important to remember that half of the fires caused in TCH are deliberately set. So I think it has to go back to committee. We're going to spend hours. Everyone's going to be moving motions. Creating policy on the fly like this never seems to have a positive outcome. Let's let committee do their work. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Okay, thank you. So we have the referral motion. Councillor Matlow, question?
You, Madam Speaker, Councillor Pasternak, have you met with Daryl Chung from the landlord lobbyists recently?
Madam Speaker, I'm not sure if that's clarification of the motion. Mine is a referral motion. Did you have trouble understanding a referral motion?
Councillor Pasternak.
Councillor Pasternak.
there's a
We
reason I
have
asked
met
this.
with stakeholders, yes.
So you have met with Daryl Chong, who's the lobbyist for the GTA.
You can go check
So,
the lobbyist register if you want.
did the landlord lobby request that this either be scuttled or killed, or specifically with regard to the
Well,
fee,
Madam
to house
Speaker,
people?
he's having trouble understanding what referral means. Could you
No,
please
Councillor
explain-
Pasternak, please.
I understand.
The members of council, you moved the motion, so they have the right to, for 3 minutes to ask
Obviously, it was
clarification.
registered.
We will be.
Questions are not
I know, but we will be debating the referral after the questions are asked.
What would you like?
Okay, go ahead,
What I'd
Councillor
like to know
Matlow.
is, did Mr. Chong, when you met with the landlord lobbyists, when you met with Mr. Chong, did he request that any component of rent safe,
Madam
including the
Speaker,
fee?
this is totally inappropriate. If the councillor is concerned about lobbyists, he should go to the lobbyist registry.
I'm actually asking.
The questions are totally out of order.
Councillor
Madam Chair?
Okay,
They're totally out of order.
okay, Councillor Matlow, please, just on his motion.
It is.
No, but you're not, because you're asking who's been lobbied. That's not clarification of his motion.
The origin of the motion, I wonder.
So please, do you want to ask a question on his motion only, please? Thank you.
I'd just like it to go back to committee so we can protect tenants.
So you know what, you're not going to answer my question, but what you said just said enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wong Tam, clarification of his motion only, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Are you aware that the staff had conducted research and consultations over a 2-year period in order for them to assess the program to actually deliver the report that's before us today?
I know there were consultations, and I think the report is a good start. It's a great framework for discussion, but based on the questions asked of staff and the nature of the answers, there's more work to do.
And so you believe that by sending it back to committee, that you'll be able to get richer content in the 6 public consultations or the 7 stakeholder meetings or the 300 engaged individuals that staff already spoke to over a 2-year period. Is that correct?
Some of the questions were, the nature of them were protecting tenants. It's going back to make sure that we've explored all insurance options and making sure we have a preventative strategy in place. This framework here, I think, will add to endless litigation and will end up in rent hikes, and be a barrier to the building of purpose-built rental.
And Councillor, you believe that by sending this item back to committee, that even though staff have internally consulted 15 different divisions before tabling this report, that the committee will be able to do what that hasn't already been done by way of public consultation, by way of 2 years worth of research, by way of conversation and consultation with 15 divisions? Like, what do you possibly hope to achieve that hasn't already been done over the past 2 years?
Councillor, you do know that what comes out of committee are recommendations to council. Council has the right to either accept them, adopt them, or send them back or amend them. And a referral back to committee for more work is a normal course of action if we feel more work has been done. It was a very large question to staff meeting. That's usually an indicator that there's more work to be done.
Okay, thank you. I believe you've answered the question.
Well, actually, no, I have one more question, Madam
Okay.
Speaker. Recognizing that this particular item was already debated quite robustly at the committee, there was lots of public input. There were many hours of, like, literally we had to extend the meeting, that we'd already gone through a very robust committee process. It's not that there were no deputies.
Okay, Councillor, please ask your question,
I guess
please.
I'm trying to understand what could this possibly achieve that we didn't already go through at the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Or is this a delay tactic?
No, well,
Well, no, I mean,
Councillor Pasternak.
well, look, the objective here is to make sure tenants are protected in the best way possible without endless litigation. It's an attempt to make sure we encourage purpose-built rental in our city, and to make sure there's an emergency management plan when catastrophic events happen. I don't see all those pieces smoothly going forward. It's time to take a sober second look.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis, clarification, please, just on the referral.
Madam Speaker, I did hear my colleague say that he is looking to have some insurance package in this. I'm not sure if it was in his motion.
No, it's not in his motion.
Would he consider including that wording in there, that we ask the Executive Director of Licensing and Standards to come back if we defer this motion with...
Yes, no, there's no doubt. One of the main reasons we're sending it back to committee is we want to make sure there's a blanket insurance policy that protects tenants and gives them the best housing possible, and not to litigate between.
Would you consider putting wording in there in your motion that addresses
Well,
that?
I think because Councillor Carey-Janis' motion is already on the floor, wouldn't it be part of the referral?
Everything will be part of the referral.
Everything is part of the referral.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank
Right,
you.
thank you.
Councillor Perruzza, questions on the referral?
Yeah, I mean, you understand that what we have in front of us represents about 12, 13 years worth of work, debate, consultation, input, and you have been here for a large chunk of those years and been, you know, part of the work that's before us. Why would it need to go back now?
Well, Councillor Perruzza, I have your advanced circulation of your motion, and this is one of the reasons it should go back. We have to do better. We have to protect tenants. We have to have an insurance product that protects tenants and make sure they're put into temporary, dignified, secure housing. We don't want to get into a fight with our rental owners. We want to make sure that we build our housing and rental stock to appropriate levels so we can put downward pressure on rent costs. I think it needs more work.
But you understand that what we really have in front of us is now a policy framework that gives staff some of the tools by which to be able to enforce some of the work orders that they have built up over the years. The thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of work orders that they've issued over the years that they haven't been able to enforce because there's just simply too many of them. The bulk of the work that we have in front of us gives them some modest tools to be able to do that without litigation, without having to take people perpetually to court.
Councillor,
you understand that, right?
I can only tell you, I can speak from personal experience, we respond very quickly in my office to tenants. Issues or work orders are issued. When they're not complied with, we send staff back for enforcement. There's more work to do.
You understand that the audit program,
Okay,
the MREP
Councillor,
program,
please.
on the website has thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of work orders that landlords basically haven't dealt with, and we've been powerless to enforce in any meaningful way. So what the program that you have in front of you is a modest attempt to give them the tools to enforce some of those work orders.
Well, I can't speak to your ward, but clearly we send staff back for enforcement in the areas that when issues come in front of.
Thank you, thank you. Councillor Bailão, clarification of the motion, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Councillor, I'm just going to try to understand a little bit better why you think this should be referred back. You said based on your questioning was all on recommendation 2, which is the cost recovery item. Is that your only issue with this report?
That triggered the most questions by most councillors.
Okay.
It's a major issue. It leaps off the page.
So the issue is the cost recovery funds for the city from the landlords.
It's the mechanism to protect tenants that is problematic.
The mechanism to protect, I think there's nothing in question, there's nothing saying not to protect the tenants. It's just that it basically allows the city to recover the costs if they haven't been good landlords.
Well, I mean, I see this as extremely messy, leading to years of litigation, a barrier to the building of purpose-built rental, a rent increase in stealth. I think we have to send it back and look at insurance products. We have to rely on the private sector to protect tenants through insurance and through preventative strategies.
Okay, but yes, the city solicitor, you do understand this, the city solicitor said it's their obligation, and the only thing here is just we're just trying to protect the city. I mean, it doesn't mean that we can't assist them and work with the insurance and advocate to have these insurance programs, but do we really have to send the whole entire program back because of this? I mean, would you like a report back maybe that can help you on this, on these things in a couple of months to further these conversations about us helping them get insurance? Can we assist you in anything? So that there's been a lot of work, as other councillors have said. There was more meetings in between committee and council. We've had staff, the committee asked staff to have meetings both with the landlords, both with the tenants community. There's going to be reports back. This is it's a new program. I think we're all adapting to it, and we all have to work together on it. There's no question about it, Councillor. But to just send everything back again, is there...
Well, I guess you know the dilemma. If it was in order, we would send a piece of a report back. We can't do that. You can't break up a staff report to council and send a piece of it back. Unfortunately, the whole thing has to go back.
But if your issue is the insurance, can we instead draft a motion to ask for staff to maybe work with the... well, I think actually Councillor Karygiannis was going into that direction. Can we have that return come back in a few months to see if there's anything that we can do? I mean, I think the mayor posed the best question. There's only 3 people that are going to pay this.
Okay,
so if you don't want to pay, it's either
Councillor.
the landlords or tenants. So we can assist the landlords, but...
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. If members of council want to speak on the referral, please put your name up. Request to question staff. 2 minutes only. Who wants to speak on the referral? No? Okay, so we're going to vote on it then. Recorded vote. Okay. All right. Come on, Councillor Perruzza. I've already said it 3 times. No. We're voting. On the referral, recorded vote. Well, I'm sorry, you were on the phone. Recorded vote on the referral.
Councillor Karygiannis, please. Councillor Ford on the referral, please.
Huh?
The deferral does not carry. The vote is, or sorry, the referral does not carry. The vote is 2 to 22.
Thank you. Okay, next is Councillor Ainsley to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have a motion that I would like to move. That City Council direct the Executive Director of Municipal Licensing and Standards to notify the local City Councillor when a building in their ward scores below 50% on a building audit by the Rent Safe team. I just want to have that formalized. I know that staff, and I want to thank staff for all the information on the building audits that they do put on the open data portal for the City of Toronto. I think that transparency is very important. From my own experience, I recently had a building in my ward. We weren't notified or didn't know that it had a low score until tenants started reaching out to us. So I'd just like a little bit more outreach from staff there, which they've agreed to. I want to thank staff for all their hard work on this. Excuse me. Councillor Perruzza mentioned a couple of minutes ago that this has been a long process, 12 to 13 years of work and input. One of the reasons why I think the majority of us didn't vote for the deferral motion that we saw. For myself, I did say I was moving this. So for myself as a city councillor, I have 5 neighborhood improvements areas in my ward. Residents are constantly coming to me saying they have issues with the building, concerns with the building. 2 of the things that stand out the most for me in this report is a 5-year capital plan that building owners are going to have a 5-year capital plan. I can't tell you the number of times when I reach out to building owners after getting complaints from tenants that they tell me work's in progress, it's going to get done. And when I say to them, when? We're working on it, Councillor, don't you worry about it. That's if I can even get to the building owner who's not using a management company or, just can't get to them. The other part of it in Section 8, expanding the criteria to roofs, pest infestation, mold, water pressure, windows. Those are probably in my top 10 list of complaints that I get through my constituency office when people are contacting my office about the state of their building. I think, I'm very happy with this report. The onus is on the landlords, and that's what it should be. I've listened to some of the questions, and my first thought was, if you owned a house and you had someone living in your basement and you had these complaints, you'd be expected to take care of it. You're the landlord. My children, if they were living in any of these buildings with this list of complaints, as a parent, the first thing I'd be like, what's the plan to fix your apartment? I don't know. Well, why isn't your landlord telling you why the apartment isn't getting fixed? What the plan is to fix it? Why, when you go to your apartment in January, it's freezing, and when you go to the apartment in August, it's 90 degrees because there's no air conditioning on. So I'm fully supportive of this. I'm looking forward to it, and once again, I want to thank staff for all their hard work.
Yes, you are. No. Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam to speak.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I too would like to extend my thanks and gratitude to staff. I think it's very important, Madam Speaker, that we recognize the history of this work to enhance the policy, to create a bylaw, to provide further supports for tenants. It has been a long time coming. But, Madam Speaker, this is not the initial kickoff. This is actually a pivot. Because the report is actually responding to the process of rent-safe TO and the progress of rent-safe TO. So it's, of course, making some amendments based on the observations as staff have already concluded, based on consultations that have gone out with both the industry as well as the tenants and tenant organizations. And I think, Madam Speaker, this is a very good report. What's missing from this conversation, as we've sort of spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to make life easier for landlords and how to make business environment easier for landlords, what's entirely missing from this debate so far is that there were a series of recommendations that came out of the committee that actually strengthened this report. And because we recognize that there were enforcement gaps that needed to be addressed. So that, Madam Speaker, is a good thing because MLS and that division has always put forth some exceptional policies. They have not always done an exceptional job, unfortunately, Madam Speaker, around enforcement. And as I note, I think it's important that we recognize that staffing up to get the inspectors out there, to make sure that they can follow the work plan to a dedicated schedule, that, Madam Speaker, is what has been missing from this debate. So I do think that we have enough to go on. I recognize that there's going to be industry members on behalf of the landlord sector or perhaps the land development sector that will probably want to challenge this bylaw. And council members, what else is new? Every single bylaw just about that's put forward gets lobbied on, or we go to court to defend. So this will be no different, and I believe that the city staff have done everything they can to close the loops. But it is important for us to recognize that they are building upon layers and layers of feedback that have already come from the community. Are we there yet? Do we have the best bylaw at this point in time? Certainly not, but it's certainly stronger than where we first started, and we have some learnings. So I do want to, Madam Speaker, just finish on a couple of quick points. The city solicitor said, and I think it's important for us to remember, that the landlord has a responsibility to continue housing the tenant while they're under an agreement and under contract. That obligation never falls away, whether a property is inhabitable or not. That is their obligation because that's the contract, just as much as the tenant has an obligation to pay their rent. the landlord has an obligation to keep them housed. So I'm actually not so worried because there's enough, there are probably enough people trying to defend the interests of the landlord. The one thing that stands between us and the landlord is oftentimes, you know, whether or not tenants are organized and active, and whether or not we have the legislative framework to sort of compel proper due process as well as to ensure good outcomes. And that, Madam Speaker, is what I believe we have before us. This is not easy legislation, not by any stretch, but the staff have done everything they can to ensure that they have a much stronger, improved bylaw moving forward, and that is a good thing. What I think it's important for us to remember, one other thing, is that when we go into the 2020 budget process, and when we take a look at all the bylaws and all the things that we said we would do, whether it's through different strategies or plans or even the enforcement of bylaws, we have to make sure we empower the divisions with enough staff to go and do the work. So the policy is great. The bylaw is definitely improved, but we now need to operationalize it to get the outcomes that we're looking for, and that is the next conversation, the next debate as we head into 2020 budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wanted to rise to just take a moment to acknowledge the importance of having a program like Rent Safe in a city as large as Toronto, where a vast majority of our residents are in fact renters. 2 weeks ago at the Planning and Housing Committee, we passed a number of important recommendations that you see in front of you here today. And actually just a few days after that, we had heard about the tragic 5-alarm blaze fire at 235 Gosford. More than 300 residents in that situation were displaced by the fire. And of course, one of the recommendations that we have here is to require the landlords to help pay for the cost of tenants displaced in emergency situations like at Gosford, like at many other buildings over the past number of years here in Toronto. And for me, reflecting on this, I can't stop thinking about how closely these two events took place. And it really underscores the importance of the Rent Safe program and initiatives like what we have in front of us here today, because it actually impacts people's lives. So there's situations where the city has to step in and look out for resident safety. And that's something that should always be our #1 priority. That's what we're here to do. And these recommendations actually give us the ability to do that without hesitation and recover the costs. And I think you heard that through the line of questioning today. With the rental crisis that we have in our city, too often landlords are taking advantage of and capitalizing on those low vacancy rates. People are stuck in their housing situations. And absent these sort of regulations, there's very little motivations for some of our landlords, not all of them, but for some of them, to take the proactive measures that are necessary to keep people safe. You know, I routinely hear about 1501 Woodbine. I routinely hear about 500 Dawes and about the terrible conditions that people are forced to live with in those buildings every single day. And let me remind the industry, like, these regulations don't come forward because you're doing a great job. Like, regulations come forward because there's problems. And that's what we're trying to respond to. So if you're not happy with the regulations, you know, and again, there's a lot of great actors out there that do the proactive maintenance, that are good stewards, that are good landlords, and operate wonderful operations. But a few bad actors, and too often across the city, drive an agenda where the city is forced to step in to protect tenants, and that's our job, and that's what we have to do. We need to do this with every resource and measure that is available to us. And we need to make sure that these situations where worst-case scenarios take place, we have the ability to respond quickly and recover the costs associated with that. You know, in my own ward, Beaches East York, we had a worrying miss with the collapse of the Crescent Town Bridge, and that was just over a year ago. And it was another example of neglect on the property owner to the state of failure of a bridge structure. Now, the city, we had gaps in some of our policy, and as Councillor Wong-Tam was mentioning, this report looks at that too. And I have to say and commend our city staff, and the internal audit did a tremendous job at identifying those gaps and putting new processes in place to make sure that doesn't happen again. We got lucky because the bridge collapsed at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning, but any other day of the week, you know, there would be hundreds of school children crossing that bridge every single morning, and it would have been catastrophic. The bottom line is maintenance issues become structural issues, and that's what we're dealing with. Many of our buildings in this city of Toronto are at a particular age. That building stock is getting older. Much of them were constructed prior to 1980, and the maintenance has not been performed on these buildings to make sure that they are safe. Lacking the provincial regulations that came out of the Elliott Lake catastrophe, we are still missing those regulations, and it makes us very difficult to command proactive measures taken on behalf of the landlord industry. But we need to keep pushing for that. Gaps in people's knowledge around their rights related to renting. We hear time and time again at our committee how problematic that is. People just don't know what their rights are, and they're vulnerable and they get taken advantage of. Earlier in this meeting here, we were celebrating the success of 777 Victoria Park and how we got through the planning process in under a year. That is a huge milestone, but it also underscores the fact that these projects and building new rental takes time. So we really need programs like Rent Safe in place to affect and protect the stock that we have. I do want to thank all my colleagues, Deputy Mayor Bailau, John Tory, on the work that's been done on this and advancing it through committee. I think the recommendations in front of us are thoughtful, and I'm happy to support them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Perruzza to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. I have a motion that is just coming online, I believe, and it's going to be put on the screen any minute now. And it's just basically a friendly minor amendment to Councillor Karygiannis's motion that speaks to, asking our staff to look at the insurance issue and reporting back in the first quarter next year on some possible options that we might have in requiring landlords to carry those packages of insurance that provide some greater protections to tenants who find themselves displaced out of a building and for an indefinite period of time. I'm hoping you'll allow me to just stop the clock and put the motion on the screen so that you don't rule it out of order at some point, or rule me out of order at some point. There it is. Okay, good. Thank you. So I'm hoping that people will support that. It's very modest and it's very minor. I just want to take us back for a second because I was somewhat miffed by the motion to simply defer this program. I just want to remind people of where we are and how long it took us to get here. You know, we've been at this for some 12, 13 years. We started from a place where, tenants basically had no one here at the city thinking about their issues. They could call up and like a homeowner, ask for an inspector to go out and inspect a particular issue in a building. If they drummed up the courage to step forward and do that, because as most of us know, it's very difficult for somebody who's living in a tenancy to do that, against their landlord, because that's the way it's viewed. So we started the MREP program, where we put together a unit of people, a unit of inspectors to go out, and they basically audited every single building in this city. They wrote up thousands and thousands and thousands of work orders. Were they luxury type work orders? No. Bare minimums, because that's all they can enforce. Building code violations. Bare minimum property standards violations. There's no Cadillac here. It wasn't about producing a Cadillac. It's about bare minimum decent living standards. So they wrote up all those orders, and at the end of the day, couldn't enforce very many of them. That's not to say that every landlord out there is a bad landlord. No. Some of them, comply willingly, but many of them don't. And it's the ones that don't, and then they are powerless to do anything with. Building code violations, egregious property standards violations. Councillor Bradford is correct. A lot of our rental housing stock is at a point in its life where it easily deteriorates. Landlords, my friends, have done a fantastic job in fighting for their rights. They've gone to Queen's Park and they've gutted rent controls. They've gutted them. Because subsequent governments have just acceded to them. Where now you have rental housing coming out at not just market value, because we have a housing crisis beyond market values. Because people can't find places to live. And then when they do, they have to sublet their apartments illegally, as we found up in Gosford, where there's some 300 tenants, 300 plus tenants on the leases. There's like 500, 600, 700 people living in the building. We know that. Why? Because they can't make do. They can't pay their rents. They can't find their housing. And on top of all of that, now, all new units, and you know the situation. It's very, very difficult. So landlords have done very, very well. But who's fighting for the tenants? Who's speaking for them? These are bare minimums. And every time we come forward with a bare minimum, someone comes along and tries to tackle you mid-stride. I get it. It will introduce some additional paperwork for tenants. It makes it more onerous. But that's because for landlords, but that's because not every landlord is a good landlord. Because if they were, then they wouldn't be forced to produce these plans and the color-coded signs and the boards and having to post their notices and all those other kinds of things. But we need to do that because otherwise we are powerless in the situation.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Lai?
Thank you, Speaker. I'm here listening to both sides of the arguments, and I do understand this issue has been discussed for a long, long time. And although I do actually agree with Councillor Pasternak that this is not really a perfect report. So I have a motion, if I may.
Staff have it. Just one moment. Okay.
Thank you. I think the problem lies with the standard lease from the province, because on the standard lease now, that they only have saying whether the tenants would have insurance, yes or no. So because they do not allow any of the rental agency or agents to alter the standard lease. So if we may actually ask the province to consider that on the standard lease, to elaborate a little bit about the contents insurance and about tenants insurance, and it's not actually very expensive. So if we don't go this route, there will be in the last 20 years, there's nobody wanted to develop any kind of this product about rentals. So we'll defeat the purpose of affordable rentals in the city of Toronto. So basically, I think if we can request the province to consider amending their standard lease provision, I think it will probably help all parties to make sure that the owners is just not on the landlord, which is very, very hefty to them, and it might drive them out of business, and it will probably be a barrier for them to develop this kind of affordable rental products in Toronto. So, thank you.
Thank you. We do have some questions for you. Clarification of the motion, Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, am I to understand from my colleague that she is looking to have a motion that says that if there's a fire in the building, beyond the control of a tenant, that they're responsible for their housing?
I'm sorry, can you reiterate the question?
Want to restart my time, Madam Speaker? Thank you. Madam Speaker, am I to understand from my colleague that this motion says to the tenant that if there's a fire in the building beyond their control, that they would be responsible for their housing in view of being thrown out of that building because of the accident that happened?
How it works is usually when we were writing up offers to lease, we will have clauses asking the tenants to provide contents insurance or liability insurance.
This is housing.
And whatever, I mean, this could be including housing. Liability is including housing.
So what you are...
Councillor, please allow the councillor to answer.
And recently, the province has changed to a standard lease, so nobody can actually write on it. And they just, they just say that whether the tenant have insurance, yes or no.
Councillor, my question is, are you requesting or are you suggesting that the tenant be responsible for their housing if there's an accident in the building and they have to vacate that building?
Well,
yes or no?
That will be included in the third-party liability, and it's just part of adding maybe one more provision to the tenant package. Tenant package insurance are not very expensive.
So the tenant would be responsible for that insurance and not the landlord, in your suggestion, correct?
Well, I think that's the way that you can actually deal with this in a more fair manner, and it's not going to cost the tenant a lot of money on this.
So why wouldn't we be passing this cost onto the landlord versus the tenant? Wouldn't you be on the side of the tenant and making sure that the landlord has this insurance? They're already making millions and millions of dollars versus the tenant that's struggling to pay the rent. Which side are you on?
Okay, please, councillor.
Well, I mean, I'm on both sides because I want to make sure that the landlords can survive in making more products for affordable rental, and in the meantime, it's not going to cost the tenant a lot of money to just add one more provision to the tenant's package insurance.
What would you see the cost be to a tenant about having this insurance?
Well, from my experience, a tenant's package insurance is just ranging from maybe $100 to about $300.
A month?
A year.
$300 a year to add this package onto their insurance.
That is, from my experience,
okay. All right.
Thank within that range.
Thank you. Councillor Matlow, clarification of the motion, 3 minutes.
Councillor Lai, through you, Madam Chair. There's been a lot of work done on rent safe. And the focus has been about what we can do, and with landlords, property owners, to protect the health and safety of tenants. Why does your motion put the onus and the burden on tenants rather than what we are trying to do through Rent Safe to make sure that they are protected from issues with property that they don't own, that they may not have been responsible for, but they are being subjected to? Why do you want tenants to pay more for a building that they don't own when they are already subject not only to the rents that they pay today, which is reasonable, but also often to above the guideline rent increases, and now unrestricted rent increases for all new units in Ontario?
I appreciate that question, and I do understand that this has been, been discussed in committee for a long, long time. But I think anything would help to make sure that there's a fair balance between the landlord and the tenant. And like I said, it's not going to be a whole lot of money for this extra provision for the tenant's insurance. And the standard lease now in the province that they have, there is nothing. It used to be when there's an offer to lease being drafted, we used to elaborate that the tenants usually is responsible for their own contents insurance. It's their own content. It's not the landlord's content. Only their own content insurance. And third-party liability, something happens and all that. So basically, this is just adding another aspect to this whole tenants package insurance, just to make sure that is fair for everybody, so everybody is protected and not the city. The city does not need to pay for any of these burdens.
Councillor, through you, Madam Chair, you are aware that the Act already allows, if a tenant wants to have their own insurance. That is an opportunity. But do you also hear, I mean, this is analogous to, for example, with the road safety debate, the upset about, those reflective armbands being handed out.
I'm sorry, this is out of order. This is not, this is about this and not about the armbands.
That it's about, do you hear, though, that it's about reversing the onus on the tenant, like the pedestrian, to
absolutely
protect themselves
not,
rather
Councillor.
than
Absolutely not.
Okay,
rather than doing what we can do with landlords.
Councillor Matlow, clarification of the motion, please, of Councillor Lai's motion only.
And for that matter, Councillor Matlow, I have one of your constituents emailing me yesterday to want the armbands. So much for that question.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, clarification of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do want to clarify where the imbalance is that requires this motion. Said that this helps us with some form of balance. I'm having trouble understanding that in a market where we hold a record in Canada for the number of people who are now spending over 50% of their total family income just to put a roof over their head. We hold the record. But at the same time, in the same month we learned that from the Globe and Mail, we also learned from the Globe and Mail that investors spent a record $8.3 billion purchasing apartment buildings in Canada because it was the single best investment you could make in real estate in Canada, and that the only thing stopping that number from reaching $10 billion was that they ran out of apartment buildings to buy. So I'm having trouble, when they're so attracted to this investment, understanding where the imbalance is. Could you explain to me how landlords who are clamoring to buy these buildings are losing their shirts?
You are correct, Councillor Carroll, that in Canada, but not in Ontario, because Ontario has a rent control legislation in place that all these investors will invest everywhere else in Canada, but not in Ontario.
No, the numbers here say they ran out of apartment transactions that could be made because they ran out of buildings going on the market in Toronto, Canada.
Well, basically, there is no such product for the last 20 years. Very, very little products about this affordable
You're
rent.
not aware that apartment building owners sell to each other and back and forth constantly, and they do this because it is so profitable?
They do sell it, but because of rent control, this is not really a very profitable business anymore, according to some of these investors.
Why did they so badly want to buy these buildings then?
Because there was not enough supply.
Yes, because they have bought them all up, because they make the money.
Because
is that not the case?
Because nobody is building.
Okay, thank you. This is not clarification of the motion.
I'm just trying to clarify where the imbalance rests.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Carroll, can you come up here for a second?
And one second. Thank you.
I wanted an opportunity to speak on it, and I'm pleased that the referral motion did not pass, because we've been involved in this for a number of years, actually, when it was licensing committee, and we worked with city staff on that, and actually it's been a few years since we were able to bring it forward with recommendations, and we've heard a lot of deputations as well during that process. There was a lot of work put into this report, which I support, and the motions that have been passed by members of council could be referred back to staff in a supplementary report coming forward to planning and growth. But, Councillor Perruzza made a comment, and he's absolutely correct. The reason we're here and the reason we're in this situation is that years ago we had problems with landlords, and I'm going to say slum landlords, okay, and where there was tenants were living and felt they weren't maintaining the building, and it was just disgusting. And so we had to keep getting after them with property standards and getting up. And because of that, you know, we worked together with city staff and brought forward the report. And it's because of that is why we are where we are today. And we have to hold some of these landlords, and I'm saying there's a lot of landlords out there that are very good. They, you know, they work with the city, but there are some landlords out there that couldn't care less. And unless I know that we do an audit the buildings, but what's happening within the in-suite, the units, the work isn't being done. And so the only time we hear about these issues is if tenants call property standards, they call 311 to come and investigate if they don't have any cupboards, they don't have any hot water, or they have, you know, bed bugs. And so there's a lot of those issues, and we really need to hold these landlords accountable. And so that is the reason I'm supporting this report and a number of the motions that have come forward and report back at a later date at planning and growth. So I just wanted to make those comments because I was involved in it from day one when we brought this forward at licensing committee years ago, and now it's here today for approval. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Speaker Nunziata. Councillor Perks?
So this one's really simple for me. It's a simple question about which side are you on? Which Toronto do you want? Do you want a Toronto that's a great place to live? Or do you want a Toronto that's a great place to make money off people who are just trying to find somewhere to live? It's really that easy. It shocks me how this debate suddenly becomes about something else. Oh no, if we don't make it good for entrepreneurs, then we'll never get enough housing. It's always sort of there in the background. And it's funny the people who make that argument always forget what the word entrepreneur means. It means risk taker. The whole notion that the private sector can be counted on to make investments to build apartment buildings is based on a market theory that a bunch of people are trying to make money and they go make investments, and the ones who are the most efficient at it make a profit, and the ones who are inefficient or have a bad product lose their money and get driven out of the market. That's market theory. That's how it's supposed to work. But here we are with motions to refer and motions to take the risk away from the investor by making the tenant have to carry the insurance. It's amazing to me that people who believe that the private sector is the solution do everything they can to undermine the market mechanism by taking all the risk out. By saying instead of guaranteeing a good place to live, we need to guarantee that you get a return on your investment whether you have a good product or a crappy product, whether you hold up your end of the bargain or you don't. You know what the insurance that the tenant pays to make sure that they don't become homeless is? It's their rent. They've already got a deal. You provide the housing, I pay the rent. The fact that we aren't requiring landlords to hold up their end of the bargain, to meet property standards, to make sure that the fire system is well maintained, to work on to make sure you've got a capital repair reserve, all those things that are written into RentSafe. The fact that we even have to do this shows that the balance in the marketplace is terribly, terribly skewed, because all the rules at the provincial level are written to guarantee people who make their money by owning wealth absolutely secure, and make the people who have to rent a place to live absolutely insecure. This is about righting the balance. And the fact that there's any hesitation about righting the balance is deeply concerning to me. We shouldn't be asking the province to offload the risk of a fire or other emergency in a building onto the tenant, as Councillor Lai's motion does. We should be asking the province to give us more money so we can build social housing, because obviously the private market won't deliver decent housing that people can rely on, and we have to bend over backwards as a municipality to try to rebalance that market. Very simple question. Whose side are you on?
Thank you. Please, no applause. Thank you. Councillor Carroll to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, before Bill number 5, you and I share something in common. Before Bill number 5, our two wards had the highest tenant populations. We were more tenants than owners. So we both spent time on the rent bank committee, tenant defense committee. But you know, it's hard for me. I own a home now, and it's hard for me to hold a frame of reference for what renters go through now. When I rented, I'm going to upset the tenants in the audience right now. My husband and I, when we were young and renting an apartment, we paid $127 a month to live right across the street from the De La Salle football field on Avenue Road. $127 a month. We didn't have a lot of money. I only made $18,000 a year as a bank teller, and my husband was still in school, so that was it. That was the total family income, 18 grand. That meant that what I was paying in rent was 8.5% of our total income. 8.5%. So I had an insurance policy. I could afford it. I was only paying 8.5% for shelter. That was all in, everything but my phone. That's not the case today. You want tenants to fork over for the insurance and help maintain the building? First, we're going to have to get the landlord to fork over and help maintain the building, rid it of its bed bugs. I only have to drive around my ward and look at the pile of mattresses to know where they are. We need the landlord to step up. He needs to make his investment. She needs to make her investment. God knows they're clamoring to own these. They buy them in whatever condition they're in because they are, according to the Globe and Mail's investment papers, the single best investment in real estate you can make right now. They're running out of buildings to buy. They're dying to buy any building they can and flip them and hand them on to children and grandchildren, and then they flip them over to someone else, and then they come in and apply to build a swanky condo beside them. They're having a field day owning these things. The only thing they're not doing is investing in the lives of the people in them to keep that business flowing. And there's only one way to do it, and that is government regulation and government enforcement. And that's all this is about. We're not asking that landlords stop making money. Heaven knows they will continue to make money, flipping them and transacting them and just making money every time. Every REIT in Canada's got some apartment buildings. Every single one. They love them. We're just asking that they take some of their mega profits and invest in the lives of the tenants inside those buildings by making those buildings livable. That's what this item is about. And if the Landlord Association lobbyists can't get that and think they have to lobby against that, then somehow this business is going to fall apart on them. Because we're going to start to look to new models. We're going to start to look to when we build affordable buildings, we'll own them. Because we can't trust you anymore, private landlords, so we'll just have to build them ourselves and own them and take responsibility for them. Or you can take responsibility for your assets right now, and we can have a happy working relationship, and people will get to live with dignity inside your buildings. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Bailao.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too want to thank staff. I know that there's been a lot of work put into this report, not only for this report, but actually over the last few years. As many people have said, this has been a discussion at committees, different committees, tenants committees that we have, community development, and I think it's a work that will continue. There's more reports that are coming. We need to be vigilant on this issue. We need to continue to work with the stakeholders, and we need to continue to improve the program. I think if there's one lesson that we learned is that we can't just create this program, walk away, think that all issues are solved. We have to be able to be critical of ourselves and say we can do better, and I think that's what we're doing here is we're talking to our stakeholders and saying we're not doing as good as we're supposed to. We need to do a bit better, and that's what we are acknowledging in here. I also want to take a moment just to thank the tenants that have come to all these consultations, the organizations that put their opinions, their efforts, and most of them are volunteers as well. But I do also want to thank landlords. And unlike Councillor Perks, I don't think this is a discussion about which side you're on. I think we do need good landlords. That's what we need. It's how do we get to have good landlords, and how can we shape government policy to make sure that we're ensuring that? We need rental stock. We need people to be able to choose to live in a rental building. We have an unprecedented level of debt in this country because we have this fascination with home ownership, because there's still this thing with renting. We have to make sure that people are able to feel comfortable and have some security in choosing to rent, that they know that when they go and choose to live in a building, they know what kind of building it is, that if there is an issue in a building, that there's tools to solve those issues, that there's a secure tenure in that building, that they can know that they can stay in there. And at the end of the day, that even if you live in a very low income, that you have a decent home to live in. That's all we're asking in here, is that we have the tools as a government to protect our tenants, for them to have a decent home. So I think this is a report that we will continue to fine-tune with our tenants, but needs to be moved ahead. We have these big issues that we need to deal as a city. We have a very tight rental market that creates a lot of risks for our tenants, and we have to be conscious of that. We have a climate situation. Some of these towers are the biggest polluters as well in our city, and so if we want to address some of these issues, we need to work with landlords and tenants to give them good quality of life, to make sure that we tackle these issues and we work together with all our stakeholders. So I hope that we move this forward. And that we think about it carefully. I have to say there were two issues. I've spoken to both the landlords and I've spoken with tenants and some colleagues of mine actually that have done a lot of work on this, because there were two issues that I had to put my two hats on and think about it. One was the dine safe, and our staff alerted it for some of the concerns that they have about stigmatization with people. And I spoke with some of the people and said, no, it is really important that we alert the tenants and we alert the community of how these buildings are doing. And actually, somebody said that when I was talking to somebody about this issue, actually Councillor Matlow, he said that the tenants had told them, do you want bigger stigma than not being able to invite your school friends because you have pests inside your unit? And that actually really touched me, because yeah, more than a sticker in the door, that's probably the biggest stigma you have. So if I can have a way to address that issue, I'm going to make sure that that happens. And then the other issue was the cost recovery. And I think our mayor, in his questioning, put it really well. I think there's three people that are going to have to pay that, is the tenant, the landlord, and or us. And I think that if a hotel has a fire, we're not going to run to house everybody and say, here, my hotel, I'm going to pay all your costs. As a city, we're going to pay all your costs. Obviously, we work with them if it's an emergent situation, but we expect to have that cost recovered. So should we, as a landlord. It's their business. We understand that there's risks. We understand that we should cooperate with them, maybe to work with the insurance industry to have some products that protects them as well. I think that we'll be more than willing to do that. We've done it with other industries. We've done it with Uber. There was no insurance product, and we've done it.
Thank you.
So I think that we need to cooperate, but I think we need to think of this issue as a practical issue, move forward, and think that the work doesn't stop here. The work continues.
Thank you. Okay. Motion number 1, put on this, oh, sorry. Mayor Tory to speak.
Speaker, thank you. I listened with some fascination, because I always do listen carefully to the explanation of how the market works from Councillor Perks. It's always interesting to hear that perspective. And you won't be surprised to know that I don't share exactly his recitation as to how he thinks it all operates. But what I regret more than that is the fact that he would put this on the basis of us being in here and whose side are we on. Because the fact is, and I want to follow along with some of the remarks, Speaker, that the Deputy Mayor Bylaw just made, which is that, and I know Councillor Perks wouldn't agree with this either, in fairness to him. He's been pretty consistent in saying that the housing that should be built is social housing. But the fact is, we all know, if we're being honest about this, that we are not going to be able to address what is a crucial shortage of affordable and all kinds of rental housing in this city with the government doing it alone, or nonprofit providers for that matter. We need private sector money and ingenuity and ideas and investment to help to make that happen. And that is why I sort of reject the notion, as I do on many things, that we have to polarize it into saying whose side are you on, because the fact of the matter is, and this is the failing of the marketplace, because there are failings of the marketplace, lots of them all the time, it's not perfect, that there are people today, and we could identify who they are. I've been in the buildings, and so has every member of this council, who are operating within the rules, keeping their buildings in good repair, following all the rules, whatever they may be, and still making a profit, and thereby having the money available to invest in their buildings and keep them in good repair, because the whole thing goes in a circle. If you operate the building properly and you keep it in a state of good repair, then you're going to do better and you'll have more money because you make a profit to invest in the building going forward and, frankly, to earn a rate of return. Yes, and I don't have any problem with that. Councillor Perks and I have had these debates before, just like him saying, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, that we don't need and shouldn't have any foreign investment. And I think that's a point of view with which I completely, absolutely, 100% disagree. And I also would disagree with him if he would say that we don't need landlords that can earn a return on their investment, because everybody needs to earn a return on their investment or they won't make it. And that's back to the point that Deputy Mayor Bylaw was going to make. But it comes down to the good ones and the bad ones. And I've been in the buildings of the bad ones too. And they're people who are owning buildings and earning a return, and they wouldn't own the buildings if they didn't earn a return, but they've chosen to do that at the expense of the living conditions of the people who live in those buildings. And I would just argue that's not necessary, but like so many things we end up doing here and other governments do, you have to regulate to try and deal with the people who don't act properly as opposed to those who do. And that is why I would come to saying that I'm not troubled by this package of things that are brought forward here. What do we have here? We have requirements that say that the building evaluation document has to be displayed somewhere. Well, that isn't a big hardship, to take the document that you get from the evaluation of your building and put it on the bulletin board or whatever. We have a requirement that we should have a schedule of pest control services that are shown to people. I don't think that's a big hardship, because I guess if they're not posting a schedule, it might imply there isn't one. And there probably should be one. And in fact, there definitely should be one in places where it's happened. Require the landlord to develop and maintain a capital plan for each rental building, a 5-year forecast. The good ones that I referred to, that actually operate in a business-like way out of consideration for their own asset, leave alone the tenants who should be their first concern, have such a schedule. They have it, because that's what part of running a good business is all about. So the notion that we should say, well, have that plan in a file and be able to show it to us if we ask, as the regulators, is not unreasonable. Evaluate the feasibility of expanding things like conditions of building roofs, pad infestations, and mold as considerations. And so this is the list we're dealing with here, and I've left off deliberately the last one I want to address. If you'd stood with me and Councillor Perutza last night, or with me and Councillor Wong Tam at Parliament Street last night at York University, and you had sort of had that question put in front of you that I posed earlier on to our officials, which is, in order to make sure that people have somewhere to live, we're not talking here about the Shangri-La or about a luxury condo, just a place to put your head on a pillow when your building has had a fire, and you have only the 3 options. I haven't heard anybody suggest there are any other options other than the government could pay, the tenants could pay, or the landlords could pay or be responsible for, is a better way to put it, through insurance or otherwise for that. I don't have any trouble answering that question. And what is put here, in the absence of an answer that we have, yet don't have from our solicitor, and which that's why I'll support Councillor Perutza's resolution on getting an opinion on that, the answer is fairly straightforward. as to who should take responsibility for that. And that is where Councillor Perks and I would agree on saying when you sign the agreement and when you pay the rent, there goes with that an expectation that if there's a problem, and we're not saying it's the landlord's fault there was a fire, we're just saying the landlord has the responsibility, as opposed to the other choices, as to who looks after those people. And so that is why I will be voting for this, including in particular Section 2, the one that deals with taking responsibility in the event of these disasters. Because I'm smart enough, you may not think I'm that smart, but I'm smart enough that when I've been not once at Parliament Street, but twice now to York University, and had to answer to those people that are without a place to know they're going to go and live, to understand that somebody's got to take responsibility for this, and I don't have trouble between the three choices making that choice. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Okay, we'll put the motions on the screen. Motion 1. All in favor? Carried. Motion 5. Sure. Recorded vote.
The motion carries 20-4.
Motion number 2. Oh, item as amended? No. Motion 2 as amended by motion 5. All in favor? Carried. Recorded? Okay. So that's motion 2 as amended by motion 5.
The motion as amended carries 22-2.
Motion 4. All in favor? You want recorded on all of them, Councillor Perruzza? Recorded vote.
The motion carries unanimously, 24 in favor.
Motion 6. Recorded vote.
The motion does not carry. The vote is 2-22.
Item as amended, recorded vote.
The item as amended carries unanimously, 24 in favor.
Okay. Our next item is on page 3, timed item EX 10.6, development charge complaint. Councillor Karygiannis, do you have questions for staff?
Madam Chair, I do not have questions of staff. However, I do have a motion. If I get-
Okay, just one second. I'm just going to see if anyone else has questions. Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Holiday? Questions?
It was a simple technical one. I noted in here there was a difference between townhouses, back-to-back townhouses, and stacked townhouses. If I recall from the report, shuffling my papers, stacked townhouses have a different development charge. Have I got that correct?
Through the Speaker, stacked townhouses in our bylaw are considered apartments due to their average occupancy, which differs from back-to-back townhouses.
Is there a difference between the planning controls that are around stacked townhouses and the way that we treat them in our DC bylaw? And what I'm getting at is in areas of the city, the zoning says you can have townhouses, and if I got it correct, that townhouses fall within the permissions of the broader townhouse category, stacked townhouses. If I got that right.
I'd have to defer to perhaps our solicitor on that matter.
It's just a basic
I'm
zoning.
sure through you. Yeah, as far as my experience, there's no real zoning difference between a back-to-back townhouse layout and a stacked townhouse. The zoning and the planning controls would be basically the same.
So can anyone explain to me why there's a difference in the way that we treat them from a DC bylaw perspective versus a planning built form control perspective?
Certainly. We're, through the Speaker, we're able to get statistics on the average occupancy of units.
Right.
And our development charges are based on the number of people that tend to live in that built form. And so we have made that distinction. As stacked townhouses could be numerous levels up, and in that they attract a tenancy that's more akin to an apartment than a multiple.
Is the DC charges higher on a stacked townhouse versus a conventional one, or lower?
Through the Speaker, the charges are higher on the ground level developments, such as a multiple townhouse configuration. A stacked, more like an apartment, has a lower charge.
As a lower charge, but if I understand, there's more people.
Sorry, through the Speaker, there are typically more people in a ground level townhouse than in an apartment unit.
But on the same piece of land, you would have more units. So therefore, there's a higher intensity of people. They call it people density on stacked townhouses than conventional townhouses. Have I got that right?
That's not incorrect, but our charge is based on per unit. So you may have, it's the people per unit that is the basis for the charge.
Have I got my understanding right that the principle of DCs is to recover costs of building the city around the increase in population? So is there not an inconsistency or a conflict with the concept that if we're building an intense form, such as stacked townhouses, it could have a larger draw on the system, and therefore we would want to collect higher development charges?
Well, through the Speaker, I think we believe it's consistent in that on a per unit basis, the stacked has fewer people. You may get more units on a given area of land, and that would then result in more charges or more recoveries.
Okay, if we wanted to examine this further, what would the right window be? It's not now, but is it through the DC charge review?
That's correct. Our DC bylaw has a 5-year lifespan, and we review these definitions and how they apply and how effective they're being and how, frankly, how clear they are to the development community on that 5-year basis.
So the window would be our next review cycle?
That's correct, and the current bylaw expires in 2023, in May of 2023, so that review would take place in 2022.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holiday. Questions from Councillor Perks?
Yes, I just want to maybe try to get where Councillor Holiday was going. If we have many units on a property, we collect more development charges because each unit gets a development charge, and that's the way we carry the cost of having all those units.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, so the ground, and you said ground-related units tend to have more people?
That's correct.
Because they probably have kids or whatever. That's more common.
Yes, sir.
So the cost to the city of providing the services for those additional people is larger than an apartment unit with one person or a couple 2 or 3 stories up.
Through the Speaker, that's the general idea.
And that's why we would distinguish between back-to-back townhouses and apartment buildings and charge more for back-to-back townhouses than we do for apartment units.
That is correct.
So basically what seems to be happening here is the applicant decided to try to get the lower development charge and save some money for themselves. Is that sort of what's kind of happened here?
Absolutely. It's a question of cost to the developer.
And we reviewed their appeal, and based on that review of the appeal and looking at what the applicant applied for and how we treat everybody else who does what this applicant is doing, we've decided, no, we're going to treat these as back-to-back townhouses, not as apartment buildings.
That's correct.
Okay, I think I understand this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Councillor Fillion is next.
Thank you. Could you just briefly go over the process if an applicant is unhappy with the development charges that they're being asked to pay?
Yes, through the Speaker. Under the Development Charges Act, there's a provision for complaints to be registered with the municipality if there's a question of interpretation of the bylaw. And so when we receive these complaints, we acknowledge them, we undertake to review them and respond to the applicant in a reasonable period of time. If they're unhappy with the response and it is determined that this is a legitimate question of interpretation, they are given the opportunity to have a hearing which the city conducts at its executive committee. That is the situation that occurred in this case.
And then if they're still unhappy, what's the process from there?
Certainly. If they are unhappy with how their case has been handled or the determination of the municipality, they can appeal the result to LPAT.
So there is an appeal process that's quite separate from council.
That's absolutely right.
Can you tell us how many townhouse applications we would have in a year, or how many similar, I guess what I'm trying to get at is if we were to start making political decisions on development charges, what would we be opening the door to?
Certainly. Through the Speaker, in 2018, we recovered over $700 million through development charges, and I believe there were approximately 40,000 units permitted that resulted in those charges. The number of complaints we receive is relatively small, and our objective is to treat them fairly and consistently. We met with this applicant on 3 occasions, and so at that point, though, our objective is to enforce the bylaw and ensure that it's been applied properly.
So were council to say, maybe this, I know nothing about this applicant, but we like this applicant, nice guy, so let's give them a break here. What would that do to our ability to collect development charges from other applicants?
Through the Speaker, no doubt it would change the expectation of the market that a complaint to the city might result in a reversal or some other treatment that's outside the bylaw.
And whatever rule we negated here by a political decision, would that in effect sort of require a change in your interpretation, or might it?
We would continue to apply the bylaw as it stands until it's amended, Councillor.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much. When was this when did this application come in? The appeal of the DCs.
Through the Speaker, this complaint originated, I believe, in 2016 or 2017.
And when was the application for the redevelopment?
That I cannot answer.
Is it built?
Yes, through the Speaker, that's completed.
So some time ago.
Yes.
We don't see these very often at council, but has council ever overturned staff advice on a matter like this?
Through the Speaker, I believe that has happened, although, as you say, it's very rare.
And who's appealing? It's the applicants appealing. It's not the new property owners.
Through the Speaker, that's correct. The developer paid the charges and is entitled to the complaint process under the Act.
And has the transfer of property turned over to the residents in this case? Do you know?
I do believe the units are all occupied.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam, question?
Yes, thank you very much. I want to just confirm the development charge that the city had levied. You have deemed it to be correctly applied and calculated. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And an appeal can be made before, I guess, elevated to council if there's a credit amount that's in dispute. Is that correct?
Through the Speaker, there are three specific opportunities to have a complaint heard. One of them is with respect to whether credits were due. One is that there was a miscalculation, and the third one is that the bylaw itself was misinterpreted.
So based on that particular test, those three criteria for the appeal, you've reassessed based on the applicant's complaint, and your assessment is that everything was applied and calculated accordingly.
Yes, that's correct.
So the recommendation to council is to deny.
Yes.
Okay. And so how much money exactly is at stake?
Through the Speaker, the report identifies I believe it's $700,000 and possibly $23,000 at stake.
So how often is it that an appeal is made after the project is completed for a quantum of this nature?
Through the Speaker, well, we do receive a number of complaints. The way they're resolved will depend on the specific circumstances and the time it takes to resolve them. Under the Act, there is a requirement that a complaint is registered within a period of making the payment. I believe it's 90 days.
Okay. And how many internal staff divisions or staff persons was involved in drawing this conclusion before the staff report was tabled?
Through the Speaker, the former Corporate Finance Division handles the complaints and consults with the Chief Building official, who is the initial adjudicator at the counter, and also with the solicitor. So a handful of staff may be involved, 5 or 6.
Yeah, but representing about 4 divisions or 5 divisions, is that correct?
Typically 3.
Okay, 3. So it's not like one person made the decision. You had a test that had to be met, and was that decision by staff unanimous?
Through the Speaker, yes. And perhaps it's worth mentioning that in 2017 and 18, our process was reviewed by the Ombudsman and various changes were made to make sure that it was robust and thorough.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, questions?
Yes, thank you, Speaker. Through you to staff, DC charges are passed on to the purchasers of properties?
Through the Speaker, the payee of a development charge is the developer.
Yes.
In some cases, in purchase and sale agreements, a portion of the DCs, particularly if there is an increase between the purchase and sale and closing, a portion of any increase in that period can be the responsibility of the purchaser. But typically, this is a payment made by the developer, not by the occupant or buyer.
No, I understand that, but if a developer is constructing a property, all the costs associated with respect to that development is apportioned and assigned based on the valuation that you're paying for, in this case, let's say a unit, that would incorporate all the costs that the developers will be paying. Would that be correct?
It's correct to say that the developer's costs are typically recovered through the purchase
Through the process, right. And so I get my question to you then, and you've outlined in terms of response to a number of questions that this is some time ago, and that maybe I'd just ask Councillor Fletcher if she could just kind of stand out of the way there, please. That these transactions had taken place. So if the developer were to recover, or if we were today to say that the funds that the developer is seeking, that we would return those to the developer, assuming that the payments that have been made by the purchasers and so on, some portions of those funds comes from amounts that are being paid to the developer. Would they be getting a refund if the developer was successful?
Our contractual relationship is with the developer, and typically there would be no mechanism for any of the funds to go back to the buyer.
So we don't really know that, right?
That's correct.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis.
Madam Speaker, from you to staff, when the developer... I can't hear myself, Madam Speaker.
Councillor Carroll.
No, that's okay.
Yes, if we can have some quiet in the council chambers.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When the developer came in to put for the readjustment or to ask for money back, did he show a case that he might be right because of the way the development was done, and other developments similar to this, like apartment buildings, this could be considered an apartment building? He put this case forward. Would that be correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there is, to what he submitted to us, there is a case that has to be addressed, or a case that has to be looked at, a little bit more thorough.
Through the Speaker, yes, Councillor, and we did undertake a very thorough review. As I said, we met with the developer or their agents on 3 occasions, although I think we were unwavering in our view that the built form is not only in appearance back-to-back townhouses, but it just does not meet the test under the bylaw to be considered an apartment unit for DC purposes.
I think the difference in what they were prescribing, what we're saying, is the landing and how they get through the garage and the front door and everything else. Would that be correct, and can you explain that a little bit more?
Certainly. Through the Speaker, these are ground level units back-to-back with underground parking. There is a common underground corridor access from the parking garage through which people may access their units. And that underground corridor has 2 exits to the ground level that I understood from the applicant were required for fire purposes. And the applicant contended that those exits from the corridor should be considered the principal entrance or principal common at-grade entrance to the units, and therefore they would be considered an apartment.
Is this a unique situation that has been, we see for the first time in such construction?
Through the Speaker, I mean, this particular, I think I would have to defer to the Chief Building Officer, but there are some aspects about this that are
unique.
Unusual.
Some aspects of this that are unique that need maybe a deeper dive and for us to take another look, since we haven't had such other proposals in the past. Would that be correct?
I believe the Chief Building Official would like to respond.
Through the Speaker, the configuration of these back-to-back townhouse units is such that from the outside, they look like regular row housing type units that are configured back-to-back. Each unit has its own set of steps that goes up to the front porch, which is the principal entrance that you enter from grade, but you also have a secondary access from the below-grade parking that takes you into the unit.
But it's unique.
I haven't, from my experience, I have not seen that. My understanding is in this design, the builder was required to put that in to meet exiting
But
requirements.
it's unique.
It is.
Something that needs to be farther investigated. Something
say
to
from my-
meet the litmus test for us to say, maybe there's something there. Would I be correct or incorrect in that?
I would say incorrect. From my perspective, looking at it, the principal entrance is from grade, up a set of stairs to the front door.
Is this something that we like to encourage? I think you said something about safety aspects and all that stuff. Is this something that we'd like to encourage future developers to look at and probably bring forward in order to make sure that all the fire regulations and we certainly enhance the living conditions of our residents? Is this something that we like to encourage or discourage?
I would say that my purview is somewhat limited to the application of the development charges, Council.
Through the speaker, the configuration of this townhouse unit, it is something that I haven't seen. I wouldn't say it's
But
something
again,
I see.
Is this something that, sorry, for
Councillor,
cutting you off.
please-
Is this
please
something
allow-
that you'd like to encourage?
Councillor, please allow the staff to finish his answer, please.
My next piece that I would add to that is whenever anyone's building any type of housing type or any housing type or any building, they are required by law to meet the requirements of the building code, which addresses fire and life safety and exiting from the unit. So any building that would be built this way would be required to do this.
But let me again ask the question. And in your professional opinion, is this something to be encouraged? A simple yes or no, please.
I think that's a fair question to planning, like from planning's perspective, but I know that we do encourage townhouse type units.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis to speak.
Madam Speaker, I didn't get a question. You said something about planning to answer, and I didn't hear. I think there was conversation at that end. Maybe they can answer. They can finish answering the questions.
I'm sorry, Councillor, I can't speak for the planners. I would say, though, that all housing in Toronto contributes to the supply and affordability issues, and we, as I said, in 2018, charged development charges on some 40,000 units. So it's relevant also that the city recover its capital costs in a consistent and uniform way in order for it to provide the infrastructure that these new units require.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have a motion. If staff can put it up, please. Madam Speaker, the only thing that I'm asking for, this item to be dealt with in December 17th, 18th of next council meeting. Whether we go through it today, make a decision, or we don't, it's immaterial, and the council will have an opportunity to make it its own mind. However, we did hear clearly that this is something that this kind of development is something that we'd like to encourage, and I like the opportunity. I was not able to go to the executive committee to speak to it when this matter was in front of the executive committee. I like the opportunity to speak to my colleagues about this and bring to their attention the different kind of development there is and see if we can move forward either to encourage them or discourage further development. So this is all I'm asking for, that it be deferred to the 17th or 18th. The outcome of this would not make any difference.
Okay, we do have a question for you, Councillor Perks, clarification.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand what the value in deferring this would be. Do you have any information on...
Councillor Perks.
Councillor, I just want to ask a question.
Please.
Do you have any information on this application that isn't contained in the staff report?
Councillor, as we heard, that there's a different way of building here.
Yeah.
That probably the developer would like to come and meet you and explain to you, and then either either he pays or not, but it's something that we might in the next report of planning and development, so that we encourage builders to build. This will make it safer for the people in the garage and all that stuff. So I'd like this opportunity to come to speak to the councillors on this issue. This is a matter in my ward.
No, I understand.
Unfortunately, I was not able to go to the executive committee, and this is what I'm looking for that opportunity.
Councillor, I'm just trying to understand, like, is there anything that the developer has raised with you that we're not aware of, that's not covered?
There is, and if you've seen in the line of questions that I have, this is something that may be given the opportunity to the developer to explain to us that we can move forward in.
So what did the developer raise with you that isn't covered in the staff report?
He raised with me the issue that the building was done, it could be looked as an apartment building. If this was looked up as an apartment building, there would not have been incurred these costs. And I'd like for us to individually, if I may, reach out to your office to set up an appointment for him to explain it to you. So I'm asking for a month's deferral. Whether we move forward right now with this or we move later on, it's one and the same. Make any changes?
So you're just saying that I should get the benefit of talking to the developer, the
if
same
you
as
will-
you have?
Yes, if you,
Okay.
if you, I mean, you know, like, that's the only thing that I'm asking for. Just
Thank
an
you.
opportunity to put the developer and this new concept that we haven't heard before in front
Okay,
of me.
thank you. So, deferral. Okay, Councillor Wong Tam, you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much. I guess with respect to the deferral, who is the developer?
Genesis Homes,
And who are the principals behind this company?
the two owners of the company. I mean,
What are their names, sorry?
Barry Waldman and his brother.
And how many, sorry, I just don't want to understand the benefit of understanding who these folks are.
This is a new concept of
Okay,
development.
Councillor, just
How long have they been in business?
clarification of the motion,
What
why
have
he
they built
wants to
before?
defer.
Like, why are, I guess, Madam Speaker, council has limited and finite resources, and for us to be asked to defer this item so that there could be extra lobbying efforts to come speak to us, Madam Speaker, I think I'm just not very keen to hear from a developer on why they should be released from these development charges.
Councillor, you don't have to listen to them if you don't want to. The only thing that I'm looking for is the opportunity to reach out to you and have them speak to you. I was not able to go to the executive committee. Therefore, I feel that the residents in my area and these folks were not being able to be heard, and I'm looking for that opportunity. So,
Thank you.
in due respect, if you'd like to give me that opportunity, I will greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll vote on the deferral, recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Perruzza, your vote, please.
The deferral does not carry. The vote is 7-17.
Councillor Carroll, did you, to speak?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm speaking in favor of Executive Committee's recommendation. Here's a picture of the townhouses in question. They're townhouses. These are they. They're on the site of Timothy Eaton Secondary School. Madam Speaker, do I have the floor?
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
Councillor.
Thank you. Councillors, Executive Committee got a great presentation from the developers, visual aids and all, and they've built a great product. They have built according to a policy that we have ambition for, that we reduce the amount of pavement on sites, that we take parking underground and create more green space. That's part of our policy for planning and development, and something we'd like to see in townhouse form. But that's about planning in the official plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Development charges is about infrastructure. And what is the density on the site, and amongst how many inhabitants are you able to divide the cost of that infrastructure, and how much do you have to ask of the developer based on what they're building? Now, the fact that they have built an interesting entrance between their back-to-back townhouses for their underground parking is laudable. It just doesn't happen to change anything about our development charge bylaw and why we should suddenly start calling a townhouse an apartment. They built a really interesting entrance to their underground parking. Bravo, great product, sold like hotcakes, done. We want to encourage tower renewal concepts. We want to encourage townhouses to be developed wherever. We have lots of places where, in a tower in a park scenario, we're adding townhouses and they're sharing underground parking. Today, you're deciding whether or not you're just going to call it all apartments and be done with it. On this application, you would lose between $700,000 and $750,000, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. That's the danger when we contradict staff and make a political decision about development charges. Because heaven knows, townhouses in the real estate market are hot. When we build those developments, you know, speculators, whomever, eventually you sell all the condos in the tower. The 40 or so townhouses go like that on every site. Every large site where we add some townhouses along, they sell like hotcakes. But they're different to service. Often we set up a separate condo board for them and all of their infrastructure considerations are separate. And that's what staff told executive committee. So despite hearing about this interesting entrance to the underground parking, Mayor Tory and the executive committee made the right decision, and I honestly cannot see, looking at this picture, driving by it as I do on the way to my dad's, I just don't see how how the verdict changes in deferring for a month. The developer had his day in court, so to speak. He made his own in-person presentation to all of the members of executive, and Mayor Tory sat there with rapt attention and listened to everything he had to say. And then the committee made the decision based on the development charges, what we need them to do for us, and why we have to uphold our own bylaw. So I won't be supporting deferral. I'm glad that council didn't. I will be supporting and upholding the decision of our executive.
Thank you. Okay, so before we continue, just a couple things. I am pleased to recognize that Mr. Rene DeSantis is in the visitors gallery today. Mr. DeSantis is the designer of the City of Toronto flag, and I welcome you to the chambers today. Welcome. And each member of council will be receiving a poster of the sign. Before we recess, we have some motions that we want to add onto the agenda. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, Speaker. This is an item that relates to cannabis and zoning, and it's important because we have more facilities that are being imposed in the community where the zoning does not permit. We need to get Health Canada to ensure that zoning permission is granted before licenses are issued.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to add this item to the agenda. It is so that we can change a sign in front of a school on the turning time restrictions.
All in favor? Carried. Okay, we're recessed to 2 o'clock.